Wyatt sat quietly in the cockpit as he and the rest of the pilots, both those transferred from the Prince's fleet and those they picked up on Matcha, drifted through space at a steady pace. The wing was divided into its 4 wedges, all of them scattered at a reasonable distance to avoid detection due to their combined mass. The Noirnavio was long since lost to their sensors. Only his onboard communicator remained as his sole link to the ship. He had just woken up from a quick 4-hour nap as the rest of his pilots were also starting to wake up and send confirmation that they were active and ready. Commander Redford's initial assault strategy was risky, but everything so far was moving more or less according to what he'd envisioned. Making a quick check, he found that the probes had detonated 3 hours ago, one close to the now derelict station and the other a few seconds later further out. The Drazan would pick up the explosions and, given their location, act as shuttles or other small craft that met an unfortunate end to the damnable carrion feasters. His focus shifted to his tactical display to find a single destroyer and 2 previously unseen frigates moving toward the debris field. Commander Redford was right about the cattle ship holding escorts inside it. "I wonder how many more it has," he commented to himself as a final ping echoed in his cockpit. Now that all of his pilots were awake, he opened a link between the wedge leaders. "This is Composter 1, all systems nominal. This is Alpha 1, sir. My wedge is ready. Beta 1 reporting in, no issues detected. Gamma 1 here, Composter 1, eager and ready to fight." Nodding once, Wyatt looked down at himself and a smile crept in. At Cynthia's insistence, he had opted to integrate his heraldic shield on his chest. It wasn't a matter of honor, but rather a personal reminder of what he was fighting for and against. His smile faded a second later, wanting to focus on the task at hand. Opening a link to every fighter, he continued, "Everyone, this is Lieutenant Wyatt Staples. You know what we're facing, so I'll keep this short. I don't want heroics or unnecessary sacrifices being made. We have our orders and we will follow them. Leave any glory-seeking for another day." Or in other words, for the blue bloods among us, don't act like selfish, entitled, arrogant idiots and maybe you'll live another day, he said, and continued in his mind with a much more colorful language. A series of acknowledgments followed from squadron and wedge leaders a second later. Killing the link, he reviewed his fighter again just to kill some time. Thanks to Jincho, he had more coilgun ammunition than any other fighter. His systems felt smoother to control, and with the added speed and the marked improvement to the dampeners, if he'd pull the same trick at Jintrax, he'd still be wounded, but nowhere near as bad as that time. He had no plans on doing it unless he had no other option. Content, and still several minutes away from their first destination, he leaned back on his seat, breathing in the stale oxygen with a sense of satisfaction. So much had changed in his life that was completely outside his control, but at that moment, despite the coming battle, he felt at ease. "It feels so good to be inside a cockpit again. I don't have to worry about political games or fearing I'll insult someone I shouldn't. It's just me, space, and flying in its vastness," he said in a soft, low tone. Closing his eyes for a moment, the faces of his family flashed before his eyes and his left hand caressed the stag proudly emblazoned on his chest. Want it or not, after the Duke was defeated, his family would be plunged into the life of nobility, for he damn sure wasn't to leave them behind even if they told him to. Would they adapt to such a life? Would they even stay on Volantis, or would they have to move to another system for him to serve Clara better? He chuckled, shaking his head. "Here I am, worrying about things that are yet to happen and that no one guarantees me they will," he murmured. "Being around so many nobles is starting to affect me." Chuckling at his half-joke, he opened his eyes when he received a message directly from Redford. "Wyatt, be ready. Drazan ships are approaching. We'll engage them as soon as they reach the kill zone. I want your wing in and out as quickly as possible before Operation Weedwhacker arrives." Wyatt suppressed a chuckle. Clara's odd sense of humor was, well, odd, but he welcomed it. "Understood, Commander. We shall fulfill our duties," Wyatt replied, and the link died a moment later. "We're approaching the objective. Prepare to engage on my signal." "Received. Acknowledged. Copy that." Wyatt felt a void of discomfort form in his stomach. It was quickly replaced by a fire that came to life with the promise of the coming battle. His posture straightened, and he made sure everything was in order one last time. He wouldn't get complacent when their approach had gone unnoticed. After that, he hoped the commander's plan worked. If not, he and his pilots would need to act fast to avoid total obliteration. "Commander Redford, may I ask you a question?" Wyatt asked, breaking the silence that had fallen between himself and himself. Redford Kalen spared a glance before his attention returned to the screen displaying what it looked to be yet another disastrous simulation. "You may," he answered, before the Drazen fleet conveyed around the cattle ship, and the Noir Navio was forced to retreat after suffering minor damage, but having lost nearly all of her fighters. As he feared, a seek-and-destroy approach, while deadly, wouldn't work to their advantage for long against the Drazen forces, which, he had to remind himself, were based on what available information they had and assumptions regarding their readiness and strength. Quick tactical battle simulations were useful, but only a fool would rely on their result to be absolute truth. Another simulation began, the same tactic, with different vectors of approach. He very much doubted the result would be different. Ever since my talk with Jincho, a question refuses to leave my mind. "Commander, if FTL jumps can indeed be so versatile, why doesn't the Royal Navy use such a tactic?" Wyatt asked, tentatively. "Not one lesson in the Academy ever touched the subject, and I never thought it could be possible. I always believed that the lanes between systems were the only real jumping points. It is something only high-ranking officers and nobles are allowed to know? If so, I apologize for my intrusion." Redford looked away from the screen, not bothering to watch the result he knew was going to deliver. His eyes rested on the younger man who had delivered an unexpected salvation all those months ago for several seconds before answering. "I was aware of the fact that any point outside the gravitic influence of large stellar bodies could be used to jump away and into a system. Remember our first encounter? We didn't arrive through a traditional lane, as I recall, and we left shortly after. Granted, you were only following my lead." Wyatt's eyes widened with realization. "You're right, Commander. I hardly took note of it at that time. We were close enough to a jump lane that I didn't think any of it." "Our meeting was chaotic," Redford agreed. "This simultaneously responds and evades your question, Wyatt. Yes, there are certain military secrets that fall within my knowledge and privilege to know. I'm afraid, however, that Jincho has slumped me quite thoroughly. I wasn't aware that such a thing was possible to achieve. Historical records speak of missed jumps and catastrophic accidents, but to intentionally make such jumps outside safe points, such absurdity would be laughed at, mocked and ridiculed endlessly by every scientific institution across the Principality." Wyatt was puzzled and confused, trying and failing to form a coherent sentence for several seconds until he found his voice again. "Commander, I don't know what to say." Redford smiled longingly and saw his oldest son in Wyatt's expression for a second. "I know that expression, Wyatt. Go on, speak your mind openly. I believe that after everything you've done, it would be insulting for me to doubt your loyalty and conviction." Silently, the veteran commander gauged the pilot's reaction for several seconds until the confusion on his face morphed into determination and careful thinking, carefully measuring his words despite his permission. "Commander, if we could employ that tactic more often, we could defend ourselves better against the Erebians and the Drazen. We could strike against pirate dens and other fallen systems far more easily. As much as I don't like it, strike groups could even plunder hierarchy trade lanes with more success." He frowned. "It seems stupid to not use it. I doubt there aren't admirals or scientists or anyone else across the Principality that can't match Jincho's skills and knowledge. If there are those with such information at their disposal, I know not who they are. But I'm afraid the answer is far simpler and tragic than mere ignorance," Redford replied, glaring at the screen for a moment before stopping the running simulations altogether. "It is no secret that the Astorian Principality is considered a backwater for all of our honor, glory, splendor, riches, and technological advancement." His expression darkened for a moment as memories flooded his mind before taking a deep breath to calm himself. "We're the second weakest human nation that is part of the Pax Humanitas, Wyatt. The sole reason we have not been overrun by the Drazen, conquered by the hierarchy, or absorbed into the Commonwealth is because of the Pax. The Principality is weak, Wyatt Staples," said the commander, uttering the words his old friend said so many years ago in brighter days. To his surprise, the lieutenant didn't flinch or gasp, aghast at his confession. Instead, he nodded sympathetically. A chuckle rumbled in his throat. Loyal, yet not blinded to the realities of the world around you. It is a shame you were born a commoner, Wyatt, with proper education and guidance from a young age. He shook his head. No, it is life that molds us. There's a high chance that you would have been just another petulant, self-absorbed, glory-seeking fool had you been born a noble. On that, Commander, I agree with you completely, Wyatt replied, offering a sincere smile. I know the Principality is far from the greatest human nation, but it is my home and I am loyal to the Prince. Little else matters. The Principality has survived for millennia. Surely it must be doing something right, he said with uncertainty. If only things were as simple as that, Redford replied defeatedly. The Principality has become stagnant, set in its ways, Wyatt. We honor tradition, value petty things, put too much importance on status, and most glorify their position in life given not by merit, but by chance. The Royal Navy, for example, has not updated its doctrines for over 800 years. 800 years of dust collected on a book that everyone can read and predict. Do not misunderstand me. Solid, functioning doctrines are set in stone for a reason, but we are hardly flexible. There is no innovation, no imagination. His gaze locked with Wyatt. And you have plenty of both, Wyatt. Fortunately, I, too, am an avid learner. Commander? Wyatt questioned, put on the defensive by the older man's praise. Redford smirked. In case you've forgotten, Wyatt, I'm the commander of the fighter division. I'm a pilot. Let's be creative, shall we? Nor navio, bridge. Commander Redford Kalen smiled internally as he recalled the last conversation he had with Wyatt sometime before his departure. It was amusing to him that, were his father present, he'd reprimand him from even considering not following the established strategies that any honorable commanding officer should follow to the letter. He loved his father, but he had always been stubborn and honor-bound to his ego. With frustration, he could imagine George Lintar and his father forming a fast friendship over shared values. Yet there he was, commanding a stealth ship, ready to strike an unhonorable blow against his enemies. For once, in a long, long time, he didn't care about anything else but carrying out his battle plans and, perhaps more crucially, adapt to the often unpredictable flow of battle. He was too old and too experienced to believe his strategy would go flawlessly, but as long as the opening assault worked, there was a chance for victory. Commander, Drazen ships are approaching the designated zone. The frigates have launched search drones to investigate the debris field and the derelict station. Stealth systems are engaged and cyber warfare is ready to deploy comm scramblers. Railguns are at half charge, missile pods are loaded and ready to execute fast reloading procedures, our heavy laser turrets are undocked. Uncharged, plasma cannons and the pulse beam remain inactive, and the torpedo tubes are loaded, Galt Tirome informed, his voice solid, showcasing his experience and discipline. Understood, Redford replied, gripping the armrests tightly, his senses divided between his body and the entire ship at the same time. He didn't need to command anyone to adjust direction or focus to any of the many external cameras. He just needed to think it for his command to be issued and for the ship to reply accordingly with careful guidance from the AIs, his bridge officers, and the other decks and wings. Such a command was issued, and he could feel the entire ship shudder for a millisecond. Attention to all personnel! Attention to all personnel! Hear this! Hear this! Man your battle stations! Man your battle stations! Engagement imminent! A synthetic, emotionless voice chanted throughout the ship as all personnel moved to their designated areas. Update on Operation Weed Whacker, ordered Redford while watching the Drazen destroyer, that claw-shaped, ugly thing approaching steadily. The frigates, also claw-shaped but smaller, were further along the predicted vector. In part, he was frustrated. He hoped to lure out at least 2 destroyers, maybe one of their cruisers, but a single destroyer and 2 frigates were still an acceptable prize. The railguns adjusted their angle to his demand with deadly precision as the familiar itch of battle set in his mind. Operation Weed Whacker is approaching steadily, sir. Our wing is almost upon their objectives. 20 seconds until contact, Galt replied. eyes glued to the screens of his station, while the rest of his old comrades performed their duties to the fullest of their capabilities to maintain the clear, smooth cohesion across the entire ship. Sparing a moment, he focused on Clara's quarters, knowing the princess was there and viewing the battle take place from there. As much as he'd tried to convince her to go into the secure vault, she refused. She couldn't be on the bridge. It would put her life needlessly in peril, so her quarters were the compromise they settled on. The moment passed and his focus was turned fully to the task at hand. With a single thought, the railguns powered up in just a couple of seconds. Simultaneously, 4 railgun shots were fired and a barrage of missiles were launched from their pods in 3 quick, deadly waves. 2 seconds later, 2 torpedoes left their tubes, slowly veering off and changing course away from the destroyer and its escorts. 10 seconds later, Redford watched as the Drazen ships took notice of the missiles heading their way and the torpedoes heading in another direction. But before they could scramble, the 2 frigates were punctured by 2 railgun shots each. The Drazen had been expecting to find the source of the detonations among the debris field and had prepared to be flanked by any surviving rebel or pirate forces. They never considered a strike could come from above them. One of the frigates exploded immediately, the railgun shot piercing its core utterly. The other, though wounded, was still functioning. The destroyer, unable to detect the hidden aggressor, did the only thing it could at that moment: use its PD turrets against the coming swarm of missiles. The comm scramblers came into effect, creating a bubble that would heavily hinder any attempt at communication with the rest of their fleet. Redford aimed quickly and fired all railguns at the destroyer that was desperately trying to escape. Several missiles were intercepted by its PD turrets, either destroyed or detonated, but over half of them struck against its shields, making them flare with intensity. Suddenly, 2 greater impacts eroded its shields, blinking them out of existence only for 2 additional railgun strikes to hit in full, piercing its hull as if it were paper. The commander focused on the destroyer, imagining the devastation created inside by hyper-accelerated, dense metal rods. In fact, he didn't have to imagine it. He could see it. The ship's atmosphere was venting into space, sucking and squeezing out unfortunate Drazen through the holes left by the rod. But it wasn't dead yet. With another thought, the railguns fired again, each shot aimed at different targets. Seconds later, 3 shots pierced the destroyer yet again, one of them hitting its engines wholesale. The destroyer powered down as it began to drift, joining the rest of the debris field. The 4th shot had been directed at the limping, surviving frigate, hitting it in its center. The frigate also powered down a moment later before colliding with what had once been a freighter. The impact tore both ships apart, adding their twisted metal to the graveyard floating in space. Redford changed course, maintaining speed. The railguns were still active, but slowly returned to half charge. Satisfied with his work, his main objective was to remain hidden and use the shadow of the 7th planet to avoid being detected by scanners. It was nowhere near a victory, but it had been a good opening strike. "Operation Weed Whacker is in effect," Galt announced. "Our wing is—" "Oh, dear heavens. What is it, Galt?" Redford asked. "Commander, the fighters carried out their orders and confirmed success, but they are now being pursued by over 400 Drazen fighters and 4 frigates. The cattle ship had them deployed before." "Curses!" Galt shouted angrily. "Jammers! The Drazen have deployed their jammers! I lost contact with Composter Wing, Commander." "It is nothing we didn't expect. We'll approach quickly but silently. They don't know what enemy they're facing yet," said Redford. "But our pilots, sir?" Galt questioned. "We didn't expect such a rapid response from the Drazen." "We can't do anything for them now. We proceed as planned. We'll link up with them near the 5th planet," Redford said, earning a nod from Galt. Silently, he hoped Wyatt would surprise him to some capacity. Simultaneously, he was erasing his strategy from his mind. With those jammers in place, Operation Weed Whacker's results would be unknown to him. He hoped the operation had achieved a measure of success. Moments earlier. "Everyone ready! 20 seconds until contact! Operation Weed Whacker is right behind us. Remember, we go in, hit these bastards hard, and go out!" Wyatt ordered, fire burning deep inside his belly. A smile spread across his lips as the thrill of battle ran through his veins. Nothing else mattered at that moment. Only his orders. Only his objective. Only victory. The passage of time slowed down to a crawl, each second stretching itself into ages of suspense until the expected mark was reached. As if a switch had been flipped, time began to move in fast motion just when all 80 fighters accelerated in unison. Across his tactical screen, Wyatt saw Gamma Wedge move to one of the damaged destroyers, whilst Beta Wedge moved to the other. Meanwhile, Alpha Wedge and Omega Wedge, his wedge, moved to the cruiser. Their formations closed in, and their sudden appearance took the Drazen by complete surprise. None of their PD turrets were active. There were no mines or any enemy fighters or gunships to worry about. As one, all fighters launched one of their Hawk missiles, all of them directed at the shipyard, striking it in different locations and blowing off sections randomly. Then, as they performed a quick flyby across their objectives, they released their cargo, haywire mines. The mines attached themselves to the hulls before the entire wing turned down and away from the damaged ships. In the distance, clearly visible through his external cameras, Wyatt saw the massive cattle ship. Just in time, too, as 100 little lights came to life a few thousand kilometers above it. To his dismay, he saw the cattle ship's defenses open fire at once, but despite taking out nearly 2 scores of those lights, the rest impacted across the ship's potent shields. The explosions were tiny in comparison, but their goal wasn't to take the shields down. They only needed to clutter their sensors before the second wave arrived. This time, 24 powerful explosions that only a tactical mind could create made their shields flicker, just enough for the third and final wave to arrive. Unarmed missiles with haywire mines locked to them impacted the cattle ship's hull, detonating instantly. The visible lights flickered and then died out as power died across its interior, frying systems and, with luck, disabling its reactors. The damage to the ship itself had been minimal, but it was now a large piece of metal floating in space. A second later, now at a safe distance, the haywire mines they planted went off. The cruiser and one of the destroyers suffered the same fate as the cattle ship. But the other destroyer had been so heavily mauled that, instead of crippling it, several explosions could be detected and seen before it tore itself up into dozens of lifeless fragments. That made him smile widely, hoping there were many Drazen in it as it died. "Alert! Alert! Missile lock detected!" the AI warned him, pulling him out of his trance. "Evasive maneuvers!" Wyatt ordered instantly. Everyone obeyed, maintaining formation. Flares were released, baffling the missile's sensors or causing early detonations. For his part, Wyatt checked his display trying to find the source of the missiles. He didn't need to search for long. "Wyatt, are seeing what I'm seeing?" asked Leopold in a tone that denoted fear. "Where did they come from?" protested Nultar. "There!" Raquel exclaimed before sharing her video feed. Masked by the sheer size of the cattle ship, they all failed to see 4 frigates and at least 400 Drazen fighters quickly chasing them. "They were sitting in front of it the entire time. Here comes a second volley from those fighters." "How did our sensors miss them?" questioned Gregor, unable to hide the slight tremor in his voice. "We were running silent," Wyatt commented, then shook his head, eyes narrowing. "Everyone, keep going! We won't fight them here. If we do, it'll be only a matter before they're reinforced by more fighters or one of their active destroyers. We accomplished our objectives, and that's all that matters." "I hope you have a plan, sir," Raquel called out. "A wing against that? We don't have tactical mines or haywire mines, and everyone is down to 3 missiles each. They'll tear us to pieces if they catch us. And they're slowly closing the distance. They'll be upon us in an hour, even at this speed. Should we use afterburners?" questioned Leopold. "No, we must save the afterburners for emergencies," Wyatt countered. "And this isn't, Lieutenant?" Gregor asked. "It is, but I'm not going to give any Drazen the satisfaction of killing me," Wyatt replied, as he tried to come up with a plan to deal with their current situation. But first, he needed to inform Commander Redford of the situation. Opening a link with his communicator, he exhaled before speaking. "This is Lieutenant Wyatt Staples speaking. Composter Wing has achieved preset objectives. Operation Weed Whacker is in effect. There are 400 Drazen fighters and 4 frigates giving chase. I request order, Commander." He was interrupted by the link suddenly dying. A quick observation revealed that his sensors were jammed and only short-range communications were in effect. "Looks like we're on our own," Nultar commented, letting out a dark chuckle. "Think you can pull our asses out of the fire, Wyatt?" Wyatt let out a choked snarl. "I can try." Looking at his tactical display and taking into account their numbers, weapons, ammunition, and their position, only the fact that, cut from the chain of command and with the authority Redford had bestowed upon him, resonated within his mind. His frustration gave way to a sinister sensation he couldn't describe, but it was familiar. "I'll do as I must,"